With Canadian housing affordability at an all-time low, many Canadians expect the real estate market to crash by at least 50%, while some hope that the crash is even worse than that. But the question is a crash of that magnitude really on the table? Is it something that could happen? And while the answer to that question is always yes, it's always a possibility, the numbers and the data tell a different story. And for any reasonable person who is looking at the real estate market and assessing the likelihood of a crash, it becomes quickly clear and evident that that crash may very well never come. Now, is there a correction happening right now in today's market? Absolutely, but there's a significant difference between a crash and a correction. And in this video, I want to discuss the 3 things you should be watching for and the 3 things that will likely happen to make Canada's housing market more affordable in the future. Oh, and if you're new here, this channel is all about teaching people to thrive financially. So if thriving financially sounds like something that you're into, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Oh, and if you're watching this video, there's a really good chance that you're in the market for a house in the very near future. And while buying a house may seem like a scary task at the moment, the number one thing that you can do to make sure that you don't get screwed in the process or pay too much for your house is to make sure you have the best education on home buying available, which is why I encourage you to go to homebuyermasterclass.ca and check out my Homebuyer Masterclass. We've currently got 3 spots open in the Homebuyer Masterclass, and by the way, that is the only place, unless you're a client, where you can access me one-on-one directly. Oh, and we put a special offer in that course that makes it an absolute no-brainer. Okay, so let's discuss what's happening in the Canadian real estate market and why we are unlikely to see a 50% crash. Yes, I know there are some markets in the Ontario area where people are down up to 30% off of the peak of the real estate market in early 2022. However, those numbers are unlikely to spread throughout Canada because those markets tended to be the ones that had the most significant run-up in prices and had the highest levels of irrational exuberance when it came to buying a home. But for most of Canada, the real estate market remains stable. In fact, certain areas of the country still continue to have a seller's market even in the face of higher interest rates. And even though it may feel like the sky is falling, the truth is it actually is not, with certain areas of the country still up over the peaks in April. And while nobody has a crystal ball, there are certain things that we can look at in order to determine if housing prices are going to come down and whether they will continue to fall in the near future. And there are 3 primary pieces of data that every Canadian should be looking at right now when following the Canadian real estate market. The first is the number of home resales. The less sales there are means there's less activity, and less activity often leads to lower prices. And if you look across Canada, what you will notice is that the Vancouver and the Fraser Valley areas are down significantly with respect to the number of resales, as is the Toronto and the Montreal markets. And these markets are the markets that are seeing the biggest declines in prices. However, markets like Calgary and Edmonton, while they are seeing fewer sales, are not seeing as big of an impact as BC and Ontario. And the reason for this is those markets did not see that crazy irrational exuberance during the heights of the real estate frenzy that happened in those other provinces. Now, the second piece of data that you want to look at is the new listing ratio, and more specifically, the sales to new listing ratio. Because what the sales to new listing ratio gives you is a relative term with respect to what's happening in the actual market with respect to activity. Because while you may see less sales in a real estate market, you can also see less listings become available, which can put upward pressure on the real estate market and subsequently support the price levels. So simply watching the sales number and saying, oh, sales are down 30 or 40% without looking at the listing numbers, which could be down 30 or 40% as well, could give you a false sense of what's happening in the real estate market. And as of right now, the majority of the country is in what we call a balanced market. This is as opposed to what's called a buyer's market, which is where you would expect housing prices to come down. Because in general, a balanced market means that there's 2 to 3 months worth of supply available for buyers, which generally supports market balance and balanced pricing. And last but not least, the third thing that you want to watch when it comes to the real estate market is the actual prices. What is happening to the prices in your area? Because while it may make sense to purchase a home based on the fact that you can afford it, you generally don't want to catch a falling knife. So in markets like Vancouver and Toronto, where housing prices are coming down substantially and continue to go down, you may want to wait until things seem like they are cooling out just a little bit. However, in a market like Calgary or Edmonton or in Saskatchewan, where housing prices aren't falling, it may be an indication that you can go ahead and buy without worry of a significant correction in the market you are in. So as a general rule, you want to be looking for price stability when you're purchasing a home. Now, it's clear that in Canada, housing affordability is at an all-time low. In other words, it is very, very expensive to buy a home. And not only is it expensive to buy a home, but it's also expensive to rent a home in most markets, with rents in many markets going up by 50% or more. And when rents tend to go up past the cost of home ownership for a similar type of property, it tends to encourage renters to go from being renters to home buyers, which again continues to support real estate markets. But when affordability is as bad as it is right now, one of three things has to happen. Now, keep in mind that in many markets, housing still remains very much affordable, with the exception of Victoria, the Greater Vancouver area, Ottawa, Toronto, and the Greater Montreal area. Most markets in Canada still have less than 45% of incomes going towards housing, which by traditional measures means that those markets are still very much affordable. But in areas like Vancouver, Toronto, Victoria, and Ottawa, we need to see one of three things happen. We either need to see wages increase, which is a very real possibility given the amount of inflation that is currently in the economy. We need to see interest rates come back down, which given that RBC just moved up their forecast for the coming recession to the beginning of 2023 could be a real possibility as well. Or we need to see housing market prices correct. Now, in these markets, we've seen a 13 to a 14% reduction in housing prices, which is a start. However, given that we've seen interest rates go up by 3 to 4%, that means that there's still 20 to 30% that needs to be made up elsewhere, especially if you subscribe to the 1%, 10% rule, which implies that a 1% increase in interest rates creates a 10% reduction in purchasing power, which means that a 4% increase in interest rates means that purchasing power goes down by about 40%, which would imply that we should see up to a 40% correction in real estate prices, unless we see interest rates come down or we see wages increase in order to make up the amount that the housing market didn't fall by. Now, there's good reason why the market hasn't come down by 30 or 40%, the first of which being what we call the lock-in effect, which is when people purchase homes and they go down in value, they tend to hold on to them hoping that they will come up in value again in the future. The second reason being that new home builds have not kept up to the increase in population going back to the 1980s. Therefore, the supply of housing that is needed to support Canadians is simply unavailable. And when there's low supply, low listings, it puts upward pressure on prices, which is again why we haven't seen a massive crash. And this is proven in popular areas of the country to live, like Vancouver and Toronto, where obviously the affordability numbers are so low because there is a vast amount of people that want to live in those cities. And when you have more people that want to live in that city than you have houses available, you start to see things like crazy affordability numbers. And until such time as there's a significant amount of houses built in those markets, or there's a massive influx of people who just decide that they don't want to live there anymore, well, those markets are going to continue to be very expensive to live in. And by the way, there's nothing to suggest that immigration into Canada is going to slow down anytime soon. So more than likely, we are going to see support for the Canadian real estate market either come from higher wages or lower rates that happen as a result of a coming recession. Because with so little supply in the Canadian real estate market, a crash in values is just something that doesn't seem to be on the table unless there is a catastrophic event that happens that makes it so that Canadians across the country cannot afford their homes and are forced into a position where they have to sell. So what's the practical application of this? Well, I certainly wouldn't be a short-term buyer if I were getting into the market right now. So in other words, I wouldn't be investing just to flip, and I definitely wouldn't be flipping properties. That's a bad idea. I would also be super cautious of catching a falling knife in the markets that are coming down substantially. But in the markets where things appear to be stable, if you're a long-term buyer, it's probably safe to go ahead and purchase a property that you can afford and that will be reasonable for you to be able to continue to afford well into the future. So a 50% reduction in housing prices, probably not something that's on the table. If you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Don't forget our homebuyer masterclass, and make sure you check out this video on why you might regret buying a home to see if home ownership is the right thing for you.